So, Roma, I think you should start with some introductory words as you do it always.
Okay, Olga, thank you. Halldór, thank you that you connected to us this evening. And so, our guest today is Halldór Jóhannsson. Halldór Jóhannsson is an executive director of Arctic Portal. .org. Halldór, very nice to meet you today, and to see you in Arctic Youth podcast. And let's talk about Arctic. Olga, the Arctic Youth manager, project manager, will ask you some questions, and let's start.
Yeah, thank you, Roma. Yes, thank you, Halldór, for joining us today. It is already evening here in Russia, and I suppose at your place it's 3 p.m. Not yet an evening. So, okay, let's start. And the first very traditional question we usually ask our guests to tell about themselves, because we know well about you a lot of things. We have prepared ourselves, but our listeners can be not aware of the Arctic portal. So I suppose you can tell us about you, about the Arctic portal for starters.
Yeah, thank you, Olga. Thank you, Roman. Very nice to meet you both. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Yeah, myself, I'm born in Reykjavik in Iceland. I currently live northerly in Iceland in a community called Akureyri. It's a smaller community, but a community that has basically everything that we need to have a good life. And it's a community that has been developing more and more in Arctic science and collaboration. I'm educated in Iceland, but then I went to university in Canada. I went to University of Toronto in Canada, and I studied design, environmental architecture, and planning. That was sort of my first issue. So I've always been very interested in the environment and how we can plan things together and make things function. So design and planning are sort of my key interests. But then I have increasingly over my lifetime been interested in collaboration, international collaboration, and of course the key in both in design and planning is outreach, and how you communicate things and how you can actually get people to agree on something. So that's also been a very important component in my development, and I've taken courses in international relations and outreach and project planning, etc. So both locally and also within the EU, through EU programs. So that's sort of my background in terms of education. I established the Arctic Portal formally. We started with a declaration in the Science Ministerial meeting that was held in Salicart in 2006. That's when the Arctic Portal was welcomed as a gateway to Arctic information and data. So we have a connection to the Russian chairmanship at that time. It was established to facilitate cooperation. Back in 2006, setting up a website was quite complicated. So we helped a lot of organizations set up their web presence, both in terms of the technology and also what they should do, what they should communicate, etc. Because I learned that at that time, most of the communication was not in electronic format, or maybe if it was, then it was just a PDF being shared. but the actual interactive communication and communication is very, very limited. I've also have a background in Iceland in communicating and planning in terms of tourism. That's something I was doing a lot before the Arctic portal, still do sometimes even as a consultant, because yeah, communication is basically the key. So that's been my vision in life, you could say, is how to communicate and communicate in such a way that it can be used and understood by the different groups, both by hardcore scientists and also by the public and policymakers, because a very important component today is to communicate science to policymakers, because a lot of it is something they have a really difficult time comprehending. And they also, as we know, many of them, I wouldn't say all of them, but many of them have a limited attention span. You have to be able to communicate the message in a very short and precise way. So I've been very interested in that part.
I suppose communication nowadays lacks the part of hearing, that we speak a lot, but we don't hear each other. That both policymakers speak about importance of science, but nevertheless they do not listen to scientists when they tell them about something important, about something happening, for example, in the Arctic, like climate change, and when they give some advices to policymakers, but they don't take them into account. So
yeah, I have been taking part in collaboration such as SEON, for example. SEON is Sustaining Arctic Observation Networks. It's one of the, it's not a working group of the Arctic Council, but it's an important project of the Arctic Council and WMO and others, and supported by AMAP, one of the working groups. Anyway, I mean, it's about observations and how we can share the data. That's basically the essence of it. And we've had, over the years, many meetings with policymakers, with the leaders of the Arctic Council, with ministers. And it's always the same thing. It's like, we need funding to be able to do proper science. We need to have a lasting approach. It's not enough to study for a week or for a year or for maybe 2 years. We need to have a long-lasting, ongoing, because when you're dealing with climate change, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You know, it's something that takes time, and we have to gain knowledge. And the only way to see if there is a change is that we know how it was yesterday. We don't know how it was yesterday. We're just guessing. And that's, of course, one of the problems, is to collect the information in an organized way so that we can actually compare it. We have it in certain fields, we have it in certain areas where we don't have enough. So when we're communicating, we need to have this in place, and to be able to do these things, we need funding. So I had a discussion a couple of years ago with a leading Western politician, and I said to her, I mean, you need to provide long-lasting funding, and why don't you consider that? And then she said, you know, the reason is because scientists are not good enough at selling their knowledge. And that's probably very correct. I mean, and that's also their fault, because they don't often, and when it's funding projects, they don't build the bridge between the projects. You know, a project ends, you get funding for 4 years. And as a scientist, you concentrate on that project, but then the system is built up in such a way you have to find a new project to fund your work and fund yourself, your salary, etc. And there's no funding to actually build a bridge between what you were doing before and to the new project. So that's where we're lacking a lot, and policymakers too often don't understand. And that's partly our fault, of course. How can we make it better? That's a good question. Or I'm asking myself, and I'll give it to you too, but maybe you have ideas on it too. But I worked with the Korean Maritime Institute, for example, and they saw the need for providing information to their policymakers also as an important step for them to get proper funding for their work. And I think this is very correct. So I think the reason is partly our fault, that is those who are working with science, that we are not concentrating enough on providing the complex information in layman's knowledge, you know, in a simple enough way. And also, yeah, we sometimes lack the stamina to continue, and that's partly a problem or a fault of the academic system. That is, the scientists are not awarded enough for their good science. That doesn't affect your paycheck, you know. So there has to be a different approach to that.
Yeah, that's a huge problem, that scientists are not motivated enough. And if we compare, I think if we compare Russia to European countries, in Russia it is even worse, because salaries of our teachers at schools and people who teach at the universities, the researchers who work there, they do not get enough money for what they are doing. And
Right.
as a rule, when we're talking about PhD in Russia, we usually joke that people who go to PhD in Russia, they are rather either crazy, or they have some really great idea and they live with this idea. Because when you go to PhD here, you'll not have any money for existence. You'll get little money if you get some, and some PhDs you need to pay for. So
Yeah.
it's quite strange. How can we talk about development of science when there is no money, when people are not motivated, and when no young talented people come to the field? So
Right.
yes, it's a great problem.
Yeah, I agree. But that's of course, I don't know, it's a complex one. You wonder how to approach it, and how to make it better. I mean, it's a growing problem all over the world that too much money now, especially in the last years, is being put into useless things, as military things, when they could be used in a more scientific and constructive way. And also, because I have been working also a lot with the Chinese Polar Institute, and we have a research station in Iceland, and too many see a scientific installation as a potential military threat. And that creates problems with the science installments and then the science development, that we are not basically allowed to move forward in the scientific part, because there's always this fear or a threat that the science could actually lead to a stronger military situation, which is, of course,
Yeah.
in a way we can call it a catch-22, because it's a real dilemma, and I'm fighting that every day now. Honestly, it's really difficult, and you see that also, of course, now with the conflict in Russia, that just communication between scientists from the Western part with Russian scientists is being hindered, and it's very difficult to accept that, especially in the light of climate change. I mean, we know that the biggest permafrost fields in the world are in Russia. We need to increase that knowledge rather than closing off that knowledge. So it's yeah, we don't always do what's rational in mankind, unfortunately.
Yes, it's it's a very painful topic. So, you have mentioned that Arctic Portal have started from the signing signing documents in Saalachart. Have you been to Saalachart?
Yeah. I've been to Russia many times. I've traveled widely in Russia. I've had the pleasure of visiting many parts of the northern parts of Russia. I've been to Saalachart, I've been to Syktyvkar, I've been to Arkhangelsk. I've been to
Really?
Murmansk.
You've been to Syktyvkar? I'm in Syktyvkar now.
Are you really?
Yes.
I've been there. Yeah.
How do you find our city? Was it nice?
Yeah, it was a really nice experience. I was there for an Arctic Council meeting, and so unfortunately I was only there for a few days, but my experience was very nice. Yeah, very nice city.
That's great to hear. Yeah, we have quite a small town here. Very I think it is kind of similar to some Scandinavian towns because it is small, everything is very close to each other. As for Saalachart, I've asked about this city because we are going to Saalachart next week for youth forum for
great.
indigenous people. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Olga is indigenous, yeah, or not? Komi is not indigenous people.
Well, we are indigenous in terms of the United Nations, but we're not indigenous in terms of Russian legislation.
Yeah.
So we are not small numbered.
Okay.
So, in the middle. So let's talk about Arctic Portal. Back to our topic. So I wait when Olga asked the question.
Yeah, it was the next
Arctic
thing I
Portal.
wanted to do.
We will talk about it. Yeah, so yeah, we are well aware about Arctic Portal. We are very grateful to you about that you placed there our press release about our polar law roundtable. Thank you very much for that. And but our listeners, I think, don't know something about Arctic Portal. Could you tell about it something more? What is the kind of media Arctic Portal is? What are differences with other media, and how Arctic Portal does Arctic cooperation better now? Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you. We provide a lot of information, and we're a free source. So we provide, for example, you can see we have a lot of maps that we provide, and every day we get requests about using our maps, and we know from our statistics that a lot of people are viewing our maps and are using our maps in their work. These are maps on the Arctic shipping, Arctic communities, live in there.
I actually used the map from Arctic Portal in my master thesis.
Great. There you go. I'm very happy to hear that. You know, we also provide a good overview of agreements and legislation in the Arctic and in the North. We support a lot of collaborators like indigenous people. Like we have supported the Indigenous International Center for Interhusbandry for a very long time. So we still host them and support them. We host and we support the Arctic Yearbook, which is a collection of journals on the Arctic and governance and legal issues, etc. We provide news. We are not trying to shape the news, but we communicate news from different sources in and around. We try to communicate everything. We try to be partial and communicate in that way. we're not depending on anyone financially, so we can be independent, which is very important. We are only in English as it is. We have often thought about and we have liked to be available in more languages, including Russian, but that's not been possible, especially because financing of a project like Arctic Portal can be a challenge, because we can, I guess, by many be considered as not something nice to have, but not must have, which is a complication when it comes to that. But we have in the past often helped with webcasting. Now that technology is simpler, we've helped many projects with a web presence. We provide an overview of projects. We also have a lot of data, and that's something that many are interested in. So we do host and support some projects like the the Global Terrestrial Network on permafrost. That's something that we actually host. So all permafrost information is hosted on our servers and supported by us. Yeah, so we are partial. We provide information from different sources. You can also find an overview of information from different sources under our umbrella, and so forth. So that's why you can find a lot of information through us. You know, the problem nowadays is there's too much information. There's an overflow of information, and some say that every year about as much data is being, or information is being provided or produced as was available in the world before. So it's the magnitude of the amount is just incredible. But we believe that we are quality over quantity. So what you find on the Arctic Portal is quality information. It's good information. And yeah, that's how I would try to present us. It's what you find is correct and qualified information.
It's a great approach. Yeah, you're right that there are a lot of information, and especially about the Arctic, and the Arctic Portal serves as a very great source for people who start their path into Arctic science. You can find a lot of useful things, so that's really great. But you are, as a co-founder, how have you come to the idea of creating Arctic Portal?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. We were asked to support one of the working groups of the Arctic Council, the CAF working group, and to help them with their web presence. So I asked them, like, how do you communicate with the PAIM and the AMAP, EPBR, SDWG? And then there was a pause. So like there was no venue for such collaboration. So that's how the idea came about, very much in collaboration with the then director of the CAF Secretariat, that maybe we can develop an Arctic portal that supports a lot of that and communicates in a unified way. And we presented it actually to the Arctic Council. It was a meeting that was held in Yakutsk, in Sakha, and late Ambassador Churkin was the head of the Arctic Council at the time. And he said to me, so he gave me the chance to present it, and I presented it, and then he sort of said, so what do you want? I said, well, I would like to have the mandate of the Arctic Council to explore this further, and then he said, okay, agreed, and then continued. And then actually he helped me to develop the concept further, and then that resulted to the first version of the Arctic portal being published or opened in 2006 at the Salikard meeting. It then became evident that it's very difficult to get everybody to work together and use one platform. It's impossible. So it wasn't really possible to get all the Arctic Council working groups and everybody to work together. So we, in a way, had to take our own road. Arctic Council then developed or decided in the end to set up a secretariat in Tromsø, and of course they set up their own website. And we are not in competition with anybody else. We are just trying to promote the different things. So, and CAF, first we were working on their website and their portal, but then it grew in such a way that they became independent. I can proudly say that 3 of their staff, they are former staff of the Arctic portal, so they were trained by us, and then they took that forward, which is good, because I mean that's the intention, is to help foster something, facilitate the development, and then of course it's great if the projects can become sustainable and independent. And so and also, when you think back from 2006 to 23, the development in technology and communication techniques has changed a lot. Now websites are, in a way, a bit like a library. You go to the website to look for things, whereas communication is more in social media. So it's shifted. The whole way of communicating has shifted to one sentence in Twitter or one sentence in LinkedIn, rather than like a whole article on the website. So the whole way of communicating has shifted. But what I think I'm feeling is that we are realizing that a quality portal is extremely important, because we saw a certain downswing in our use, but now it's going up again, and very swiftly, which I think is an indication that people are realizing that, yeah, there's quality over quantity. So I'm happy that we took that direction.
Do you think it also can be connected to the fact that the interest to the Arctic as a region of the world is growing recently, has been growing?
I could talk to you all day about that.
Maybe several sentences. We don't have a whole day.
Yeah, no, seriously, Olga, I mean, it's the Arctic. It was like back in 2006, it was an area of interest. And then, of course, because of world politics, it comes and goes in a way. Now, yes, there's an increased interest, but it's partly due to the wrong reasons. It's partly because of complicated geopolitics and the fear of militarization, etc., rather than an interest in climate change and the quality of life of the people living there. But there's, of course, definitely an interest, and that's been going up in some time. That's, of course, the fact that about 30% of the unused resources of the globe are in the Arctic region. I mean, that is a big issue. So you can see that the entities like the European Commission has been putting a lot more emphasis on the Arctic in the last 10 years or so, maybe 20 years. I've worked on quite many EU projects, on EU initiatives. One, for example, an EU Arctic Information Center initiative started, I guess, back in 2011 or so. So it's a decade of, yes, politically increased interest. And then, of course, we also sense that the image of the Arctic is not clear by everybody. Some look at it more like a museum. that we should maintain as it is. Whereas those who live there, they look at it from with the perspective of how can we secure sustainable development so that we can actually make a better life for us and our children without disturbing and destroying our environment. And then there are those who just see it as an opportunity for making a lot of money, it's that combination is a little bit complex. Then, of course, climate change. We know from the research that's been done in the past years that a lot of the climate changes in the Arctic are both faster than in other parts, and it's also affecting weather patterns in other parts of the globe. So this phrase, "what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic," that's a more and more popular phrase to use. We see that events that are like focusing on the Arctic, for example, the Arctic Circle event in Iceland, has gained considerable attention. But this year, I feel that the level of participation was not as high as before. So it's a complicated question again, and honestly, the answer is both yes and no. In certain ways, it has been increasing. In certain ways, it's been increasing in the wrong way. And I still think we need to inform a lot more about the Arctic and what's going on in the Arctic and the people of the Arctic and the youth in the Arctic, because there's a lot that is not known. The image of the Arctic, we need to protect it, and we need to portray it in a better way than we have been doing so far. And in some countries also, like in Iceland, we are not really clear what the Arctic is or where the Arctic is. So the phrase Arctic is it's not a word in Icelandic, for example. We use the North. So the Arctic Ocean in Icelandic is the North Ocean. It's not Arctic. So it's more like a popular phrase now, but what's the real meaning of it? That can be debated. And also, when you look at the definition of the Arctic, how it's defined, for example, in Russia, very, very small part of Siberia is defined as Arctic, even though climatically you would, or maybe should, consider it as Arctic. So it's like I said, it's a complicated topic.
Yeah, I think even in Russia, until some moment, we have used not the Arctic, but the high north.
Yeah.
And some territories in Siberia, as well as in the Republic of Komi, we have not in the Arctic, but they are equalized to the territories of the high north.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting.
Yeah, I've been working a lot with the Northern Forum. So I've been a member of the Northern Forum. We host the website of the Northern Forum, and we've been supporting the Northern Forum. You know, the secretariat of the Northern Forum is in Yakutsk, in Sakha, and it is the Northern Territories, and I think this definition is Arctic or not Arctic. It's a complicated one, but an interesting discussion.
But they want maybe to be connected with Arctic, so they say that they are Arctic's cities and so on. Yeah. And also, you said interesting thing about the EU projects in Arctic, and as we know that European Union increases its project in Arctic, and so EU says that in one of the statements that there should be no oil extraction in the Arctic, but Norway and Russia said that there should be oil extraction in the Arctic. How do you think who will finally win in this discussion? about Arctic oil?
That's another complicated one, of course, because right now mankind doesn't have an alternative. We don't have a way to survive without oil. And of course, like I mentioned before, money or monetary things are very much driving everything. So it's those who want to make a lot of money from the Arctic. So it's the combination of the two. Like if we, for example, when the European Commission introduced its Arctic policy in when was it, 2001, I think, October 2001, they published it. And then it states oil and gas and coal should stay in the ground. And the same statement, they state that we should honor the indigenous people and their rights and so forth. So then one of the leaders of the Samis asked the Arctic ambassador of EU, so this is a good proposal, but how are you going to turn renewable? Where are you going to get the minerals from? And then he said, well, probably from Norway and Sweden and Finland. Yeah. And then she said, well, sorry, Mr. Ambassador, but that's our land, and you haven't even consulted us. And then he said, well, maybe this should be considered as the start of a dialogue. And of course, I mean, he's correct. I mean, we need to have a dialogue. And in my opinion, what we need to improve is our knowledge base, so that we can improve the knowledge that we have. And then we can say, sorry, Roman, you cannot do that in this region because it's poisonous and it has this effect and that effect and that effect. Now we don't know enough. We don't have that information. We don't have that data because we're not doing enough monitoring. We're not synchronizing our information well enough. We have good information when it comes to weather. We have good information when it comes to financial things. But when it comes to many more complicated environmental issues, as well as social issues, we have very limited information, and that's where we need to improve. Of course, Norway and Russia have developed technologies, and you can, if you use those technologies, extract oil and gas in a better way than before, and there's less pollution. So, I mean, maybe if we look at it in a global context, it's better to actually extract from there rather than going down to Africa or do it in another region of the world. And that's why I'm always saying also, we have to look at everything in a global context. And this is not least in terms of Arctic shipping. It has to be looked at in a global context. Like, why is it beneficial? Is it just disturbing the mammals or the polar bears or the whales? Or we don't have enough research in that either. But how, or is it globally better to actually go through the Arctic, even though it may have a negative impact on some issues, rather than go into the Suez Canal? You know, I told you in the beginning, I have a background in planning. And when you do planning, you have to look ahead, and you're taught to look ahead at least 20 years. So if you say, okay, population is going to increase, then ergo, you need to have transportation. You have to have sewage and this, that, and you have to be able to provide food. Or you can say, well, it's not good in this region, and we have to be in that region. And we have to be aware of this area because it has this and this consequences. And so I was listening to a Canadian environmental minister many years ago at an Arctic discussion with Arctic parliamentarians. And he was saying what I've been trying to say and what I learned in my university. It's like we have to put a value to things, because when you're doing planning, you have to put a value to it. So what are the consequences? What are the pros? What are the cons, you know? So everything we do, it can't be just based on our feeling. Like, how can we basically make it better? And that we can make it better by better planning, better information, better legislation, better education, better training, and then we can actually go through it. So I know it's a long answer, but I mean this is the key, seriously.
There should be common international law in Arctic, or there should be more national law in Arctic. What do you think about this topic? Should the Arctic zone be under international law, or there should be national more?
I don't think you should have international law. First of all, then we have to define the Arctic, and we don't have one definition of what is the Arctic. If you look at the Arctic Council different definitions, you have a map on the Arctic portal showing the Arctic definitions, and there are 4 or 5 different definitions. And then some of them include all the state of Alaska, some of them don't. Most of them include all of Iceland, some of them don't completely. I mean, that's the first one. We have some international legislations like the IMO. I think those are good, where you have guidelines, basically. You have guidelines how to approach things. We have the Arctic Economic Council, where Russia and the US have been active, especially Nordic countries and Russia. You have a protocol, like investment protocol. I think that those things are good, where you have support tools, but then each country must have its own regulations. I don't think you can. Who would then do it? I mean, would it be the Arctic Council? Would it be the United Nations? It wouldn't be the EU. But you can have those support, of course. So it comes back to the increased knowledge, and we're also facing issues when it comes to that discussion with the policymakers, because policymakers are typically employed for 4 years at a time. And so that's the time that they can actually have an impact. But we need to have a longer impact to actually make sense of things. But it's very complicated with the way policy makers are employed. And we've seen that in certain Western states like the US, that they have taken a 180. Oil exploration in Alaska, no exploration in Alaska, yes exploration in Alaska. Like every 4 years there's a shift in the plan. This of course makes everything very, very complicated, but I don't think it's possible to define, except we have, well, maybe I'll turn back a bit. We have, of course, an agreement by most responsible countries on the high seas in terms of fisheries. So that's an example of how countries can work together. We have the IMO, as I mentioned, etc. So we have, of course, the Arctic Council, and we have binding agreements under the Arctic Council on search and rescue, on emergency preparedness, and the sharing of scientific knowledge. So we have some certain agreements, but the problem with most of those is that there's no money put to it. There's not money in there to actually make sure that they can function and that those things are implemented in the proper way. That is one of the problems. So, long answer again, sorry, but I think no, we cannot put like one legislation on the Arctic. Also, when you think about the Arctic from where Olga is living in Syktyvkar versus the Arctic in Tiksi, in Sakha, Yakutia, or going over to Chukotka, or coming to Akureyri in the north of Iceland, they're so different. They're different from the climate, they're different from the environmental conditions, they're different from the people living there, economic situation, etc. So you can't just say Arctic one thing. No, far from it.
Yeah, it's a whole topic deserving separate discussion for hours, not just an hour, but hours and days. And actually, scientists are trying to resolve this situation, writing different articles, but still.
Right.
The situation is still the same. Without collaboration among countries, there is no sense of discussing it. Only for scientists. Returning back to the topic of resources in the Arctic. So we've discussed the oil and gas mining. It's also a topic that deserves a separate discussion. But what interests me, there is also a trend toward green transition. In Finno-Scandinavian countries, in Finland and Norway, we can see this trend to movement towards decarbonization. What do you think about this phenomena, this aspect of our life? Do you think it will success at some point?
To decarbonize?
Yes, this green transition movement.
Yeah, that comes a bit back to what I answered before when it comes to alternative solutions. So it's definitely something we have to try to do, but unfortunately we don't completely know how to do it. And also when it comes to quality of life, if you tell me to stop using my car, but you can use your car, then I mean I won't listen to that. I mean, we have to do it, and what I'm trying to say is that if we need to have probably a very, very complex approach to it. And I think it comes back to what I've been trying to say, whether it's decarbonizing, whether it's shipping through the Arctic or whatever it is, we have to look at it in a global context, and it has to be approached in that approach. And it has to be done through a very good business plan, because we cannot expect people to adjust to a different way of life. Well, at least people in the typical Western country, they are not ready to do that. There are people that do it because they believe so strictly into it, but there are others that, and most others, that definitely will not do it. We are ready to recycle, we are ready to do certain things, but if it's going back on life's quality, people have a very hard time with that. So I think it's again, it's an example of something that needs to be dealt with in a longer way. I think you can educate the next generation to do it, to approach it in a better way than my generation. I've spoken to many, both in Iceland and in other countries, on this topic, and yeah, people agree that we have to do something. Most people, not everybody, of course, but most people agree that we have to do something. But then when I ask them, well, would you be ready to use your cell phone only 3 days a week? So they just laugh. I mean, of course not. We're not ready to take these steps. Not really. When I was growing up, we didn't have TV on Thursdays. I mean, it's possible. Well, I mean, I lived through it, but it's a way of life that we have to adapt to, I think, probably in a longer way. So again, yes, I think the green transition is very needed. I think we can do it in logical steps, but it's not the magical solution alone. It's one component in the chain of many.
Yeah, green transition is not only about limiting and improving our lifestyle, but also using some alternative sources of energy, for example, like windmills or hydroelectricity. But don't you think that when we use these alternative sources in the north, indigenous population is pays for this. Because as a rule, for example, we have in Norway this situation that the windmills farm was built in the land of Sami people, and hydropower, this damming was also made in the territories of Sami people again.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. But there's always two sides to the coin. And if we go back to the question about the EU and their policy, it's like, yes, we want to implement that. But, yes, we want to do green transitions. It means trade-offs. And we have to do it. That's why I'm saying we have to do it through a more holistic approach. Because yes, if we are going to set up windmills in a certain area and we disturb another way of life in that area, we have to compensate. And this comes back to the tough one, which is how do we evaluate and how do we do that? Because these transitions, they're not going to be possible without sacrifices, you know? That is the tough one. And I'm not saying that it's right that they should do it in the Sami area, far from it. I'm just saying that the only way that we can make such changes is because we make some changes somewhere else, you know?
Well, don't you think it sounds like someone's way of life that differs from ours is less valuable than our way of life, and someone's life is less valuable?
That may sound like that, but I totally agree or I disagree that somebody's life is less valuable than, for example, my life. It may be different, but that's why, again, increased knowledge and increased outreach and building a knowledge base where we look at it in a more holistic way is so valuable and so important. Because if I just look at you, I can't say that my life is more valuable than yours. Your life is probably more valuable than mine because you're younger than me. So, I mean, we have different ways of evaluating. Mine might be more valuable because I have more knowledge that I have been able to accumulate than you. But then we can say, well, if you are given this chance, you may be much smarter than me. I mean, like, I'm not saying that you're not smarter than me. I'm just, you know, it's this way of evaluating that a lot of it is
We are
based on
again
feeling.
moving to philosophy.
Yeah.
I think
because a lot of this is philosophy. It is based on philosophy.
Yeah.
Is
In Arctic, many questions are
not
complex.
valuable? Because, I mean, another thing is, and you know, Olga, I've traveled a lot in Russia, and I've traveled a lot in northern Scandinavia and also in Alaska, and I have many indigenous friends, and I respect them very much. The cultural value is not estimated usually in monetary way, because going back to my argument before about how do you do planning, is that you have to put a value to it, and most people only understand dollars or rubles. I mean, what is the value in a currency? So if you say that you are much more valuable than me because your group of people is smaller than mine, then that's a different way of putting a value to it. And the cultural value is usually underestimated. So the cultural value, again, of having Samis with reindeers is probably much more valuable than having 1 million people in a German town. You know, these ways of evaluating and putting it on the table for policymakers are very important, but we have not been good enough at doing that. There's a lot of work being done by, for example, the reindeer centers, and my friend in Russia, Mikhail Pogadayev, has been doing a lot of work for indigenous people within Russia and improving the awareness and interest. And there's this really interesting project on digitizing languages, and I mean, this increases the understanding that there's value in the current, and that's how we have to build it. So that's the only way forward, again, is to increase the knowledge. So that's why, yeah, the Samis are increasing their awareness, or other people's awareness. You have a similar thing in Kiruna. I mean, there are many examples of such things, unfortunately, and they will be many where the policymakers don't see the whole picture.
Yeah, those are very complicated questions, I suppose. These questions are better discussed when face to face, sitting somewhere in a bar. Hope one day we can meet all together face to face.
Yeah, that would be fun. I would like that.
Talking about geopolitics, we talked a lot about the Arctic Council today, and I want to ask this question. What do you think about the current role of the Arctic Council? What do you think about its future? There are a lot of discussion around this topic, so please share your view.
Well, I had very high hopes for the Arctic Council under the Russian chairmanship, and there were many projects planned, and unfortunately, because of the issues that we know, it didn't go through in the way that it was planned, unfortunately, and to me that was very sad. The current situation, of course, is, again, it's another one that's very complex. So the Arctic Council per se is not functioning. I can't see how you can function on Arctic Council without the participation of Russia. It won't be effective with 45% of the Arctic being Russian territory. I mean, and with the biggest issues, well, you know, the Arctic Council is not really dealing with economic issues. It's mostly environmental issues that the Arctic Council is dealing with, and social issues. And the biggest portion of the people and the environmental issues in the Arctic are in the Russian territory. So it's impossible to see anything of real value come out of it unless Russian scientists and Russian policymakers are actively involved. So the big question is, how is that going to develop? We know that the working groups have started to do some work, and I just hope that we will all be sensible enough to continue, because I think I've been to a lot of the Arctic Council meetings, and I've been following the work, and I've been involved in quite many projects under the auspices of the Arctic Council, and we don't have anything better. We don't have anything that can basically step in. It's taken many years to build the collaboration, and the Arctic Council, like actually most governing bodies, are very much built on the people that actually take part, and the trust and the friendship that is built between the people that actually take part in it. So I am hopeful, because I know there are many good persons actively involved in it, that we will succeed, and we will manage to get through the complicated politics. But the yeah, it would be extremely bad if the Arctic Council will not manage to function appropriately. I mean, there's such big issues that are to deal with, and we have hardly mentioned Arctic shipping yet, but I mean, it's one of the big issues that the Russian chairmanship was looking at, is Arctic shipping. And I think what's happening in the Mediterranean area now in Israel and so forth is another reminder that we have to have an alternative route, and that is the Arctic route, and there, of course, the Arctic Council can play an important role. But again, one of the problems, of course, of the Arctic Council is it doesn't have any funding mechanism. It doesn't have any money really to support anything. So it's
they're not decision makers, they're rather policy makers. They can only recommend something.
Recommendations, but the recommendations of Arctic Council are very important for also future legislation. And Halldór, you told about Arctic shipping, and we had that question in our question list, and it is really important for Russia. You maybe, if you follow also like me Russian Arctic media, there are many interests for Northern Sea Road and Northern West, not for Northern Sea Road, and also some people in Russia compare Northern Sea Road with the Northwest Passage. Also scientists, sometimes politics, that Russia and Canada has common interests to develop Arctic shipping. Rather interesting. What do you think about the future of Northern Sea Road, and also of all Arctic shipping, maybe about Northwest Passage?
Well, first of all, I think Northwest Passage is not likely to become an important route because of both the navigation issues, because of incredible distances to search and rescue facilities. It will be too expensive, and then thirdly, and probably most importantly, because of drift ice. With climate change, that's just going to increase. So I think it's very, very unlikely to become more than occasional transports through the Northwest Passage. It's not going to be a commercial line. The Northern Sea Road makes the most sense, especially because you have the Yamal project with the LNG carriers that are basically ice-strengthened ships going through already. And I know last year there were some 300 voyages of those ships, and they will be increasing every year. Other voyages in the last year were only 50 something, which is of course not much. When you look at that in the context of the Suez Canal last year had some 20,600 voyages. So it's but that again tells you there's a big business potential. And of course, with better infrastructure, with better navigation instruments and equipment, the voyage through the Northwest Passage will be more and more reliable. I have had the pleasure of taking part in quite many international conferences over the last years on Arctic shipping, and it's again similar to what I've said before. It needs to be considered in a global context, because commercial companies don't see it as a very interesting opportunity yet. That's both because there's the time frame of opening is not long enough yet. There's also a question of infrastructure on both sides, even though that's being implemented more and more on the Asian side. And then there's also insurance premiums. There's the security of the connection with icebreaker support, etc. So there are still issues to be solved, but those can all be solved. But the big shipping companies are still only looking at the Arctic as sort of something in the future. So I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that it will become a very important shipping lane. Also because 80% of the imports and exports of Southeast Asia goes through the Malacca Strait and then Suez Canal or down by Africa. there is a need for an alternative route. So that's for sure. But I'm also convinced that it will not happen commercially unless there's an international agreement on it. So it has to be something that is collaboration between Russia and then the Asian countries, not just China, but Korea and Japan, very importantly, that these are working together. And then, of course, the European countries, EU, UK, and the US, because the east coast of the US is very important when you look at the future of this shipping route in an international context. So great opportunities, but again, geopolitics are not working in the favor, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've looked through the international transition through the Northern Sea Road, and in 2013 we had the peak data. It was like 70 ships passed through the Northern Sea Road, and then after 2014, of course, they went down, and in 2022 we reached again that number of 70 ships passing the Northern Sea Road. It's only about international transition. And in 2021, to be correct. And in 2022, of course, we had no international transition through Northern Sea Road. And without this transition, without ships passing through this passage, we will not have money for developing this road, because it's a huge investment project. It is important from the economic viewpoint, but also from the social viewpoint, because it helps to develop our high north territories, these towns that are located far from the mainland. So yes.
No, I agree, and it's very important both for destinational shipping and international shipping. But right now, you know, big companies like Costco in China, they are not putting enough emphasis on Arctic. They are not looking at it as a container opportunity, for example, not yet. So it's just specialized cargo unit that deals with Arctic shipping. So it's ad hoc shipping. But it's I agree with you. It's an international undertaking. But of course, the development of resources in this region, like the Yamal project, is supporting and will very likely contribute to increased traffic when the geopolitics are a bit calmer.
Yes. So it's been almost an hour of our discussion. We have discussed so many interesting topics, and we traditionally ask our guests about young people, about youth in the Arctic, and we also want to ask you, do you think we young people can improve development of the Arctic and the collaboration in the Arctic at some point? Do you think there is a chance that we can rebuild these bridges among our countries, young people?
Yeah, I do. And I trust you to do it, seriously. I think young people today are a lot smarter than my generation in many ways. And you are much more international in your thinking. And there's probably quite many reasons for that, but I mean, you know, when you look at your own home country, people of my generation, there's not that many that speak a foreign language. You speak very good English, and a lot of your friends also do that. I know that, and not saying that it's you're smarter because you speak another language, but this ability to communicate in a different way broadens your vision and broadens the opportunity. Language is always a barrier. If we don't speak different languages, then we have a difficult time communicating. And also I've learned, because I've been dealing a lot with people in China, translation can be done in such different ways. I mean, if you don't want something to continue, you can translate with a negative way. If you want it to be positive, you can translate in a positive way. So when you're faced with that, it increases certain collaboration problems. So to make a long story short, yes, I am convinced that young people will move forward in a different way. I think also that's because you have seen changes, and you're being faced with an information flow. You have an easier way to comprehend than some of the older people. You have an easier way to communicate very quickly in a different format. And I think from the young people I've been seeing around both the Arctic and in other parts, I've been lucky enough to take part in quite many youth initiatives, and I've mentored in different parts. And I've been to last December, I was actually in a local school in Sakha Republic, just outside of Yakutsk, and they presented to me some of the work they were doing. They were working on permafrost projects and wildfire projects, etc. And extremely smart kids, and their thinking was very positive and constructive in a way that I'm convinced, yes, we will see a much better approach. And I think, fortunately, young people today are less prejudiced than my generation, fortunately. And you will be able to regard each other and each other's differences and in a better way than we have been able to. So yes, I'm positive.
Thank you for the response. Yes, let's hope for the best and that we can make our impact on improvement of the situation. So
okay, may I close the conversation? Yeah. Okay, Halldór, thank you very much for that you connected to us and asked to our questions. And I will stop the recording now, and we will say goodbye to our auditorium. But I have only 2 additional questions without cameras to you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's say bye to our young auditorium. Okay.
Good.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.